Hello and welcome to All Lit Up with me, Gilly Fogg, head creative at Lighthouse Studios in Kilkenny, Ireland. In this series, we talk to animators, directors, cartoonists and puppet makers about their work and their life. My guest today is Tom Bancroft, the celebrated Disney animator, author of Creating Characters with Personality, and a very well-known and loved personality himself. I talked to Tom about being an animation nerd long before it was fashionable and the lost art of assessing your own abilities, plus how artistic frustration can be an excellent motivator. Tom offers some harsh words along the way, and I think it's valuable listening in this time when things are changing fast and the world can feel a little out of our control. We're going to jump straight into hearing Tom reflecting on his path so far.
I think there's three factors that define my artistic journey. And I'm really making this up as I go, believe it or not. But I think it's frustration. And now I'm going to forget the three. Frustration, challenges, and competition. Not all of those are good and healthy responses, and they can be negative at times. The competition side is I'm a twin. And as you'll know down the road, when you interview my brother, I think down the road, so Tony Bancroft is my brother, and we grew up drawing together. And as identical twins, you're already very competitive, but now you're trying to earn the extra love and affection of your mother by saying, which one's better? And that would be a question we would hit our mom up with so many times when we were young. And she always had a great answer, which was, I love them both the same. Now, so from that point on, yes, it was a healthy love relationship with our mom, but still we we grew up without a dad. And so our mom's opinion and her support were everything. And so I should have a fourth, which would be support. That would be the other word, because I do believe that's been a big part of my journey too. With now my wife, who's been extremely supportive with all my crazy ideas that I come up with. Like I've started multiple companies. Like you said, I've been an author and an illustrator, and I've done a little bit of everything. And so that falls into the challenge answer, which is I found early on, and I think this fits into the competition side of me, or competitive side, is that I like challenges. I kind of pursue them. And that's not true, I would say, of a lot of artists, is that we tend to be, as artists, we're more, introverted and not extroverted. And I tend to be a little bit more extroverted. And my brother, it's funny because Tony and I don't know each other at all, it feels like, because I can't tell you if he's the extrovert or the introvert, and he can't, but he says I'm the extrovert, I guess, out of the two of us. But I'm sort of like, well, but you do a little bit of both, and I do a little bit of both. We definitely like our time at the desk, where it's just hours of drawing and thinking and, playing, whatever you want to call that. But that time at the desk is so needed. And when I don't get those times, it's frustrating and challenging. But I pursue challenges. And so one of the things that started me off on that's why I think if you look at my career, I've done everything that I've gone all over the place. Part of that was necessity, the changing times of the industry. And we're in another one of those too right now, obviously. But where I would pivot. But it's also coming up with new ideas and new businesses and new, things like that. So it's driven by a lot of things. But I honestly blame more than anything, and this is a long answer, but to me, it comes down to young Tommy. I'm still trying to please young Tommy, not this version of Tom. I want young Tommy to get all his hopes and dreams. And I'm still working hard at getting him those things, and he was a big dreamer. When I was young, I wanted to do comic books. I wanted to do animation. I loved all the entertainment arts, whatever you want to call that, filmmaking, everything. I wasn't much of a reader, but I loved comic books. And so I never thought writing would be involved, but I took on writing because I wanted to I came up with an idea for a comic book series. And so I had to write it. Okay, I'm going to write it. And now I'm going to illustrate it. And I self-published that. So I started a company just to do the comic dream. So I thought, well, you have to have a company. So I'll just start my own company, a little self-publishing thing. And we didn't do much, but it was just to reach the goal of getting a comic book out into the world. And I distributed it the same way Marvel and DC distributed their stuff back in the 80s, same distribution system. And so it went to comic book shops all around the country. So actually the world, I guess. And it was break even and all that. But then I had another distraction and went on to something else. So I think those 3 things, and 4 if you add support, are the sort of defining things in my career.
That is really insightful.
It feels like I thought that through, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, that's really insightful about the internal qualities that you brought, out. Let's now look, because you're clearly, you've got a really entrepreneurial
But here's
drive.
the thing I want to say about Gilly.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump in here. When I said those words, you had a funny look on your face. And I felt like you were like, these sound like horrible negative words, because I said frustration and all that. I got to support later, but tell me what you were thinking.
I was thinking you looked inside yourself for what you brought to your career. But I think ultimately what allows us to have a career is actually what's outside ourselves. I think it's the societal structures. I think it's the infrastructure, such as education. You went to CalArts, you went to Disney. Disney was hiring really actively and aggressively from that CalArts pipeline. And I think, we all have, it's human nature to look at ourselves and go, I brought this, I did this, it's because of me. And of course it is, there's a 50-50, but I think there's so much good fortune and luck and timing in a career as well. So maybe
100%. But here's the thing, and maybe this is the difference on a viewpoint. I don't know. I'm also a man of faith, and my faith has been with me at least since about high school, right, where I got kind of serious about it, and I really dedicated my life, I would say, to God and my growth in knowing Him. And that's why I guess it's funny, because I'm reading between the lines, and you didn't say this, but, you're kind of like, well, you kind of answered with ego instead of, all the things that around you that kind of gave you a step up. I believe strongly that I do agree with all your points. I'm not saying that because obviously we fell into CalArts. We didn't know anything about it. We just sort of fell in. All these things happen, but I don't attribute those things to me or even really luck, honestly. I attribute them to God. I was being led. And so I guess you could say in a way, my answer is not, I didn't mean it to be egocentric of, oh, I did this, I did that. But I do think our personalities as people, I think even if some of those things had not happened, had I not found out about CalArts, had Disney had the timing, because it was good timing, you're right, not been perfect, I would have done something else because of who I am and my drive to be an artist. And honestly, I couldn't do anything else. So I don't say it with ego. I say this was my only chance at life. I feel like it was being able to draw and push myself and challenge myself, and through competition with my brother, honestly. So I'm sorry if it came out that way, but honestly, I believe strongly that, we as people have certain things that we're sort of designed to do. And some of us don't do those things. I will say it doesn't always work out. And so some of us live a life of kind of frustration. And that was my first word, remember, was frustration. Yeah. Is everything else that I did was frustrating, and I lost more jobs, normal jobs. I worked at a donut shop. I got fired. I was a security guard. I got fired. I was trying. I wasn't like a bad person and like being rude to my bosses. I was trying, and I just couldn't keep those jobs because my head was out there, was always thinking of something else, always on in this creative world. I was in another world, honestly, through most of my high school. And I can control that a little bit better now, thanks to my wife. But honestly, that kind of I do think creative arts, and I'm going to include writing and acting, all of those things, not just drawing and painting. It's who you are. It's a part of you. And so, but who I am as a person and kind of and evolved to become too, and I'm not done yet, still learning. I think I had built-in things, and some of that based on things that happened and opportunities that were given to me for sure. But our mom, I'm gonna go back to her again. She always was great about. We grew up. Here's the thing: we grew up poor in Long Beach, California, and it was really just on the other side of the ravine from Compton. And if you know anything about Compton, it's a very poor area. And we were I went to school with many of the people that were coming from Compton. We were that close to North Long Beach and Compton. We're right next to each other. And so I grew up with gangs and things like that around us, but I was the biggest white boy you ever saw in California. I wasn't exactly a surfer because that was popular at the time. We were just far enough away from the beach but also living in a world where I didn't have a dad, where our single mom is bringing us up and she's working and so we're kind of latchkey kids. That was a term back then that, you're not hear as much now, but that meant we would go off to school and we lived close enough that we could walk to school. We'd come home and about 3:00, whatever we got home to 3:00, we were on our own until she got home about like 7. And so we raised ourselves kind of to some degree. And what we would do is we'd watch cartoons and we'd draw, and not a lot of homework, unfortunately. So, those things definitely, shaped me. There's no doubt about it. But really it was my mom's support of how proud she was of us and how much she wanted to be in the arts, probably more acting and things like that when she was younger, dance. She was an ice skater for a little bit, but she loved that side of us. And she, rather than most parents, especially at that time, because this is the 70s, I'm older than I look. She was saying, oh no, she had no idea what the jobs were in cartooning and animation and the things that we were into. I don't think she thought that far ahead, and honestly she probably should have, but mostly she was just super supportive. And so that, and then discovering a relationship with God later in my life, honestly, I think those two things were something that really shaped who I was, to where she would always say, if a door opens, you go through it. And that was how she kind of brought the three of us up. I have an older sister. Was look for opportunities, because she was a career woman. She was a supervisor at a hospital in the insurance department. And so she had staff and all that she was in charge of. And from that perspective of kind of, having some successes in the business world, you could say, she learned enough to know, and maybe read a few business books, I guess, that, you have to rise to the occasion when opportunities come your way. And if that's probably been the biggest defining thing in our lives, is that Tony and I, any opportunity that came up, like even finding out about Cal Arts, we submitted our portfolios late. They should not have accepted us. We drove to Cal Arts and we just talked them into admitting us. They liked our portfolios, and that was good. So it wasn't like convincing them based on poor work, but they were just like, well, maybe next year or what. No, we have to come now. We're ready. And, my mom was behind that the whole time,
Okay, well, look, let's give this a bit of context to today, because everything you're saying,
yeah.
So you had support at home, you had this really, I think, energizing relationship with your brother.
Yeah.
And then you don't have much of a clue about the industry, what lies ahead. I mean, what kid knows about industry? you sort of fall into CalArts, as you say. Well, not fall. You drive yourself there and knock down the door.
Yeah, there's a longer story, but how we discovered CalArts, we didn't know anything about it. Yeah.
But, when you talk about, and I'm going to put faith to one side, if that's all right. And I know you find it difficult.
No, that's fine.
Yeah, and you find it, maybe it's not your preference to separate the two. But you mentioned before that the industry is going through a down. I see, and I bet you do too, and I hear and I get so many messages from graduates who are like coming out, who've worked really hard,
yes,
just like you did at CalArts. They are doing everything they can to open the doors, knock on the doors, dance on the other side of the door. When you were going out, just like I was, because I don't think we're that far apart, when I, went out, it was, if not a land rich of opportunity, there were lots of opportunities. So can you take us back to that time when you were coming to the end of CalArts, just so we can put it in context of what it was like? Did Disney...
For sure.
How did you get to Disney, which was like the nirvana for someone who loves to draw?
Right. And we were blessed in that we went... So, yeah, I'll back up. So we discovered CalArts. Basically, it wasn't that far from where we lived in California, but we had no idea it existed. We didn't know it was this school that at that moment, it was the only school in the U.S. that taught animation. I think Sheridan predated it in Canada for a couple of years, so that was the only school in Canada. CalArts, the only school in California, primarily. And certainly it was the only one of note. And so we found out about it. We were like, oh, we're the Disney people. We had gone to a panel at a museum in LA. It was about Great Mouse Detective. That's how far this story goes back. That film had just come out, and they did a panel at this museum of, I think it was the LA Museum of Art. And we were like, oh my gosh, we got to go to this because they were going to have Disney animators there on the panel. And I still remember it was Glenn Keane and Mark Henn, people I ended up working with later on in life. Just amazing. And so Tony and I, just out of high school, we go to this panel, and Vincent Price was on the panel too, because he did a voice, in that film, which was just amazing to see him be Vincent Price. And then somebody at the end, it might have been my mom, asked at the end, because there were in the audience, there was a ton of like wannabe, how do I get into animation kind of questions. And they talked about portfolios and all that. And then one of the parents obviously said, well, what school did you all go to? And like I said, there was about 5 different animators on that panel, I would say, supervisors. And they almost except for one, all of them said CalArts. And so maybe the other one was Sheridan, I can't remember. But we heard, so my mom's writing it down. We weren't writing anything down. We're just taking it in, just eyes wide. But we would have forgotten. So she's writing it all down. CalArts, oh, it's in Valencia. I think she even raised her hand after that and said, can you give me the address and the phone number? And I'm like, okay, that's not their job at this point. And so we were embarrassed, of course. But we got that info, and that's how we discovered CalArts. We then immediately took a trip up there and found out what you had to do. And they found out they had an experimental animation program, and they had a character animation program. They also had music and dance and all this. It was a full-on fame type animation or art school, right?
So they were actively attracting students. Like they want to fill their classrooms and their studios, so they want you to come. Oh yeah. No,
it's
still highly competitive to get in.
It was, but it was a different time. It was not near the competition it is now. I see the people that don't get into CalArts now, and they're like practically industry. Yeah. Well, they are many times industry ready already. And I'm like, that person didn't get in, so it wasn't like that. This was the early days. I'm going to say the date. It was like 1987, 88 that we were pursuing it, starting to look into it. And so that was, like I said, it was just like they just finished or about to release Oliver and Company. I mean, this was pretty far back. And so they'd only had a few, I'm going to say 2, 3 groups go through since they started the animation program.
And let's put it into context that animation program in CalArts was initiated by Disney, like because they wanted
Yes.
to feed. Okay, so let's jump forward to when you're coming out of CalArts, because I think, a reason I'm doing this, Tom, is to let the people today who are having, just to let them know it was actually a bit easier for us. It is
a good point. It is. It's proportional. We had a smaller industry back then. So you could say it was easier, and it was, but proportionately not amazingly easier. Like you had to at least, back then what was hard about it wasn't getting in and having the right portfolio as much as it is now. It was, because if you could draw, you pretty much got a job back then. Like, so it wasn't necessarily about proving, am I good enough? It wasn't that competition. The competition was really like, do you even know, have you even heard how to get into animation? Because there was nothing online. There was no online, right? This is before the internet. And there was no behind the scene videos on the beginning of Beauty and the Beast VHS that came out later. This was all like, you had to read it in a book. And I think CalArts is mentioned in The Illusion of Life at the end there when Frank and Ollie wrote their book. And that really was the only documented thing that said, oh, there's this place called CalArts that trains animators. And so you had to really research back then. That's kind of my point, is you had to go to the library and learn how to animate. You had to, if you were going to do it kind of on your own or even get started. And Tony and I did some stop motion animation, but it was because we went to the library. And so it was a different kind of a challenge. Now the information's out there. It's easy to get to, right? Just getting in is the hard part. So, but you're right. There was a lot less people trying to get those jobs because so few people even knew it was a job, right? And so when we saw that panel and they said CalArts, so we go to CalArts, we find out what a portfolio is. I didn't even know. And so we put that thing together and we submit. And so, like I said, we kind of got in and we went there only for a year and a half. Now, this is another side thing that shows it was easier in those days was when Disney needed people, because there's only one school they went to. So they would hire people that were at other studios, sure, get some experienced people. But if they just needed some lower end jobs, the entry level, they would go to CalArts. There was almost like one source.
Exactly. And I'm not in any way diminishing your achievements. But now it is a completely different situation for people graduating.
It is.
And I think...
And this is why I always get a little embarrassed telling my how did you get into animation story, because it doesn't exist now. So like it's not going to help you. And also it'll probably frustrate you when I tell you how I just magically got into my first job in animation was Disney.
Yeah.
and I stayed there for like 12 years. So... and it was perfect boom time on top of that.
Can we now dig into your time at Disney, and can I ask you to take a little more of an objective view on your time there while I ask you some specific questions?
Sure. Yeah.
What was the gender balance like in Disney in the animation studio?
Oh, horrible. It was all men, very few women. So I won't say all, of course, but on the animation side and above, that would be directors and above, it was, directors and above was all men. Animators, I think, and it's you could see them on the sort of Lion King behind the scenes and stuff. I think we had 2 women out of, say, 50-ish men that were animators.
Yeah.
And this is, like I said, beginning of the 90s, so around 1990-ish. I will say this. I'm gonna say something that's a little dangerous that some people are either gonna get or be upset by. I will say this. I never sensed once that, and a woman could tell me a different story. So take it as it is. As a young, just wide-eyed newbie getting into the industry, I never sensed once that anybody was holding women back. And why I say that is I think there's another side to the story that's, in fairness, should be mentioned, which is getting an animation back then was like collecting comic books. It was nerds that wanted to do it. And traditionally, women don't want to be nerds. Now it's popular. I will say, being a geek is popular, okay? But I'm telling you, back in the 70s, 80s, back when this was the booming of the whatever, second generation or whatever you want to call it, of animation, there were not a lot of, and it was the parents too, obviously. You're not going to tell your daughter, oh yeah, I love that you're drawing all the time. They were being pushed toward fine arts potentially. Oh yeah, go be a painter. That's gettable. There's plenty of female painters out there that they could point to. And that seemed like, now that was a dangerous road. Nobody wanted your daughter or son to go that direction. But if you were going to push them in any direction artistically, that was what existed, that was in front of them. But I will say that, no, I felt like it was the opposite. Any girl, they were kind of girls at the time, but women that got into animation at the time were very much embraced, and we were excited to have them, kind of thing.
Yeah, in fact, we had Brenda Chapman on on the podcast. And please go listen to her episode. And it's I'm sure you've heard it many times, Tom, but that moment with the Little Mermaid, and everyone's like, oh, suddenly you have a woman drawing a woman who's being a woman. And everyone's, all these men are looking over her shoulder going, oh, like that. Oh, yeah, I hadn't thought of that. And it's like, can you do some more? And it's like, yes, light bulb goes off. So I think let's let that lie, that from your point of view, as in, let's not examine too much your perspective that women weren't held back, because I get it, and there are other points of view. What
did Brenda say? Because now I'm curious. Did she I'll just disagree with that? Yeah.
I won't represent Brenda here. I'll just say, why not listen to her episode?
I will.
But I think it is true that you don't have the ultra cool figures like Rebecca Sugar right now, right? She's such an icon. So
that's what I'm saying is, obviously geek culture has come a long way, and now, honest, CalArts, you see it at all the universities around the world. It's mostly women that are getting into animation. It's totally flopped now. Yeah. I would say CalArts, I'd say my school that I teach at, Lipscomb University here in Nashville, it is 80%, literally flopped. It was maybe 20 tops back then, a female to 80 men, and now it's almost the opposite.
But I do think that there are still lots of women coming in, whether they're rising up to be decision makers, creative lead, because going back to the underlying conditions that support people's success, the questions of childcare and maternity leave are still woefully unanswered. And the question of who's in the boardrooms. If you look at the major studio boardrooms are still filled with male decision makers. However,
and just on my side of things, I have 4 daughters, so I'm very much a girl dad, and so I understand all of that, and I see that side of it too. Nobody talks about the other side of what things were like back then. And I think it's fair to add that side to the argument, just to say, honestly, they were kind of too cool for us. That's part of it, is they didn't want to get into animation. And then slowly but surely, geek culture kind of opened those doors to some, but also people like Brenda Chapman. I don't dissuade this argument, which is they also weren't seeing people like them in those roles until Brenda Chapman and a few others started getting on the, making ofs on the VHSs and things like that. And then you could also talk about the Little Mermaid factor. I do think films like The Little Mermaid change things in not just seeing a female in a main character, but people kind of forget the side of it as artists. We're drawn to all kinds of different things, but seeing a movie and falling in love with a character and then wanting to draw that character. So how many artists got into animation, female artists, because they wanted to be Ariel to begin with, and then secondly, wanted to draw Ariel, and then discovered animation. I had that. It was just Mad Magazine for me, and it was all sort of like fart jokes and stupid stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, not female skewed at all. Or
not at all.
There are women who love Mad Magazine.
Thank you.
Can we go back to frustration?
Yes.
Because I think that
was my first word.
It was your first word. So I think a lot of people will relate to your need to draw, or as you call it, desk time. You know, a lot of creative people, it's almost like a self-regulating, you've got to do it, you've got to be on your own, you've got to have that focus.
Yeah.
And then as we've been sort of dipping in and out of the really tricky situation at the moment where you have uber talented, uber well-trained people not getting the creative jobs they want, which does lead
it's a crime.
Yeah. Well, one thing, you know, the way you hear, and this is maybe more of a philosophical question, but you know the way you hear, oh, they deserve it. Everyone, you know, she really deserves a holiday. Oh, you deserve that.
Yeah.
You know, doesn't everyone deserve it? Like, does this person deserve it more than another? Or do you think it's like, if you have this creative drive, which is a way of saying it, that means even if no one's going to read it, you're going to write. If no one's going to, you know, film your animation cells, you're still going to draw. Do you think, please give me your point of view on how a person in that situation who has that creative drive, but it is not at this time being met with success, the doors are not opening. What advice do you have, you know, now that you've reached this stage of wisdom in your life? How can people deal with that frustration, especially when they're at that early stage of their career where they are so filled with energy and ambition?
Yeah. I mean, it's so hard. You know, and then there's other frustrations like work-life balance, right? There's people here that are in the industry that are listening to this and going, well, and also I can't get that desk time because I have, you know, diapers to change and I'm so busy over here and doing this. And so people are rising up in their career over me because I don't have that extra 20% that they're putting in that I just can't do. So, and I felt that too at times. I think we all do. Once we have kids and get married and stuff, the single people are just rising up because they're putting in overtime for free and all this. And we had that at Disney quite a bit, a lot of competition there. But that frustration, and what it comes from is that you come to a point, I think, artistically, I'm just going to talk art now a little bit, artistically, where you're like, I'm ready for the next challenge. I know I am. I feel like I could grow if I got this extra opportunity. I think we've become, one answer to that is I think we've become a culture that waits, and I know this was me actually, because we didn't have the internet. We didn't have ways to express our animation and just learn on our own and just make a show and put it on YouTube and people will see it, right? That none of that was open to us. And so we only had the studios to go to. We only had the conglomerates now to be able to reach that goal and that dream of being an animator. We had to go their direction. And I would say that if anybody's frustrated though, and this is what I found out later in my life, even when I was an animator at Disney, I was still frustrated. And that's very possible. Actually, a lot of the people there were frustrated. And it's not just morale that I'm talking about. I mean, artistically frustrated. Everybody wanted to move up. And part of that was that competition I was talking about. We were always competing with each other and like, oh, that guy got the better scene in Lion King. I wanted that scene. They put me on the hyenas and I wish I was on Simba because he's the main character. You know what I mean? Like that stuff was real and it happened. It was every day. And then I had a twin brother on top of that I was competing with that was getting some of those opportunities at the time. But what I'm going to say is what I did is I found relief to some of that frustration by going, okay, I can't, it's going to take a couple of years. If I saw that, oh, you're at Disney, that you can relate this to getting into Disney or actually being in Disney and not being able to move up, but I'm not getting those opportunities. What can I do that will give me those opportunities and those learning experiences and that level up that I feel like I'm ready for artistically? I got to push myself. I got to challenge myself. I'm going to make a short film on my own. I may not even show it to anybody, and it may only be 30 seconds, but I'm going to just make a short film. That's my project that I'm going to give myself. And what I did is I found projects to be my escape, my leveling up, and they almost always either spontaneously or whatever became opportunities too. Like I self-published a 4-issue comic book that I wrote and drew. I mentioned that a second ago. I did that while I was at Disney. And then I left Disney. I went to Big Idea Productions, and I was no longer drawing. And so I had to do a side thing. And I published those, and it was successful. And some of that has led to other work that I've gotten through the years. But what I'm saying is you can do something, and to find that thing, even if it just fulfills you, is so important. And I believe strongly in side projects. I think for the rest of my life, now my side project is pencilish, honestly. So I don't know but for the rest of my life, I'll have a side project, but I can't wait to get back to doing one. But most of my career at Disney, I was animating commercials on the side because I didn't feel like I was still an animating assistant. I hadn't got a full animator job at Disney. I was still doing cleanup during the day and a little bit of animation here and there, as a beginning animator. And so I'd animate, the cereal commercials, with Toucan Sam and, Fruity Pebbles and stuff, because it would give me the opportunity to be an animator, a full animator before I really was one.
I'm so glad.
But I don't know if I'm answering your question, but you tell me if I am.
What I'm so glad is that you've brought the conversation naturally around to all the great things that have changed, as in the accessibility of the technology, the cutting out the middleman when it comes to distribution, the fact that you as an auteur, because what perspective we're talking from, Tom, is I think you and I are similarly institutionalized, as in we're studio people. And so it's like, how do I get into the studio? How do I be part of this team? I love being part of a team. I love coming to the studio every day.
Yes.
Yeah. That's totally my comfort zone. But there are a lot of people, desk time is solo time. There are a lot of people who are probably delighted to have the liberation. And I'll bring up one person. I don't know, Emily Brundage, amazing, also a podcast guest who's, started her own micro studio and putting her own projects out there through Kickstarter and crowdfunding.
I've just recently followed her. I'm a big fan of hers. I literally have her PDF on my desktop. I hope she's listening. Is that she did the guide to animated...
Developing shows.
Developing animated shows. Yeah, I have it right here on my desktop.
It's really excellent. And she's got her new series, Strawberry Vampire. She's launching herself.
She's going to do a Kickstarter for, I think, episode 2 or something
like
that.
So that's,
Good
here we are going, the old times. Why can't it be like that? But you know what? There are different opportunities. Just like you were saying, it's really different. I remember that moment that I found the book on the bottom shelf of the library and pulled it open and saw Yuri Trinka. And that was like, oh my God, animation, stop motion. Now, my kids are like 12 and they're doing tutorials online. They're already miles ahead of where I was.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
So we shouldn't be, maybe.
No, I'm jealous of them. Yeah. Many of the students or even, young people getting into it right now, they have opportunities like crazy on the educational side, like more so, way more than we did. I look at Beauty and the Beast and honestly, this is at Disney, supposedly the height of Disney, you could say. And that film, there was some terrible artists on that film. I'm just going to say it out loud. I wasn't very good. I was brand new to it. But there were people, a lot of us, that were just not that good of artists. We were not the Nine Old Men, and it showed. You could see it a little bit. I mean, Belle changes quite a bit in that movie. But, there was always somebody, there was some high up people, supervisors in that level, that knew what they were doing and could go over our drawings and things like that. And it kind of helped save the movie. But honestly, like the other half of the artists on that film, and I'm counting myself in that group because we're all young, we were just, figuring it out. And I'm just using Beauty and the Beast as an example, but that happened for a few years of like, I'll say this, there was glut in the industry. And if anything that can be good that comes from low times in the industry, because I've been through the low times, I started in the industry in the low times because they were shutting down Deke Animation and Hanna-Barbera, and a lot of studios were kind of on the TV side going under when I got into the industry. And so it was a tighter industry. It was just only a few people knew how to do what we did. So fortunately, you could get a job probably. But there were a lot of people. One of my first jobs, and this, if this indirectly cheers somebody up, was I was a PA. This was pre-Disney, so it was between my freshman and my sophomore year at CalArts. I got a gig at Bakshi Animation. And if you know Ralph Bakshi or have heard anything about him, he was the guy that, and I'm this little opie, animation guy, Christian. I'm working for the guy that created the first rated X animated film. That's Fritz the Cat. And so this is Ralph Bakshi. At the time, he was doing a Mighty Mouse, New Adventures of Mighty Mouse, if you remember that. And it was pretty popular. It was kind of a neat, John Crisalucci was doing the design, so it had a really cool look to it and all that. And I was on season 2, but I was a PA, just a production assistant, doing all the grunt work, literally, and my brother was too. We were both doing it for a while there. And we were literally getting Ralph's car washed and getting his laundry done. It was pretty gross, most of the stuff, getting his cigarettes, things like that. But we also got to sort of see the animation production. But back to my point, one of my jobs I'll never forget is me, a lowly PA, and they said, Tom, here's a couple binders of resumes, because this is back when that was the number one way you're going to get your next job, was probably still a resume. All bound up, and they said, go through this and throw out the ones that have been, they're dated on the corner or whatever when we received them. If they're, older than 5 or 6 months, throw them out. And I'm literally looking through, and I'm just so into animation and like starry-eyed. I'm going so slow because I'm reading everybody's resumes as I'm trying to decide to ruin their career by throwing them out. Basically, they'll never get a job at Bakshi's because I'm throwing it out. And so I try to be kind of legalistic and just go by the dates and all that, so I have less guilt, I guess. But what I learned from that in that moment was how cyclical this industry was. I'm looking at resumes of people that probably need a job right now, I'll assume, but they had worked at Deke, they'd worked at Hanna-Barbera, they'd come back to Deke. I'm seeing this cycle of them going from studio to studio, and they're only there for 3-6 months, all that. And I'm like, that's weird. And I'm not seeing a lot of Disney, because the Disney people stayed at Disney, most of them. They had kind of a little bit more job security at a place like Disney. But the people in the TV world were cycling from these 3 to 5 different studios. The Bagnesarians, they were doing the Chipmunks, or they were doing, and so, but I'm also reading that and going, oh my gosh, many of them haven't gotten a job for a while, right? Like I'm seeing their last gig and the date on that stuff. And anyway, it was a real game changer. It was depressing, like anything.
Yeah.
Because I'm now the kid that's trying to break in and get one of their jobs, honestly. And here I'm looking at all these resumes. They've been in the industry for 10, 12 years.
Yeah.
Now, back to the glut thing that I was talking about. There's times when after a boom, we have a glut. And not all those people are going to keep their jobs. And we need people, honestly, to leave the industry. And those people are the people that came in during the boom times. And I would looked at a lot of those resumes. I was like, oh, in-betweener. They weren't really moving up. That was the other thing I kind of learned, was like I could see some people were like moving up, but a lot of people were kind of going from one studio to the next, clean up in-betweener. And they weren't moving up. And you were like, I figured out really quickly. Later on, I saw portfolios at Disney too. I was on the portfolio review, and I could see, oh, okay, here's why. It was their ability. They just weren't top achievers. They weren't striving to be better, or they just didn't have the ability to do it. And those people were the first to go when the tight times came. And so I'm a business owner now, so I'm kind of speaking with the business mindset a little bit when I say this. But that's kind of the number one thing that I want to tell students that are listening is like, you have to stick out. You're going to be competing with me. You're going to be competing with the other people in your class right now that you're going to graduate with. And if you're not competing with them, and I mean it in a healthy way now, I'm not saying the competition where you're cutthroat and all that, but at least saying, look around you at your peers and say, am I in that realm? Now, I don't have to be the top. I'm not saying you have to be the top person there artistically, but you need to be able to learn how to assess your abilities. And if you can't do that, you're going to have a lot of frustration because then you also can't figure out what you need to grow in. But so assessing your abilities is so important. And it's kind of a lost art, I think, at a lot of our schools today that have boomed during the boom time. And how they boomed was accepting people they probably shouldn't have accepted into the school.
And does that go back to the, I deserve this? Does everyone deserve this? Or actually...
No, I'm the opposite of that. I don't believe in deserving something. I believe in working hard to get something.
And don't be afraid to be the waiter in between or stock the supermarket shelves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, and have that little side comic book that you're drawing. You're never going to get money for. You're not doing it for money. You're doing it to grow or to just to feed that person inside of you that wants a challenge, that needs to grow. And if there's people listening that don't like hearing this, that's also a red flag. If you're not willing to... Here's the thing I tell people all the time, like, if it's really that much work to get your portfolio better and you've been told it 5 times and you haven't really gone in there and put the work in and gone to figure drawing, gone to the zoo, the things that you feel like you need that's missing, you've been told are missing, and it still hasn't really grown, or you only have one piece you kind of like, those are all red flags that you're not working hard enough and that maybe you don't want it bad enough. Also, maybe this isn't your career.
Oh my God, harsh words from Tom Bancroft. But it's also true that animation is not the only thing to do in life, right?
It's not.
There are lots
no,
of
and for some people that can be a relief. I'm actually saying that in a way to say to some people directly, here's your chance to be happy.
Yeah.
Because you're living in frustration. I talked about frustration at the beginning, right? My frustration was I wasn't good enough. I was always constantly striving to be better and better and better. And there was a negative side to that. There was a point where I was like, hey, I'm not enjoying the ride, And I've had those moments. But I do think our mom, I'm going to go back to my mom again, she put a work ethic into us because she was a career woman when it wasn't popular to be a career woman, honestly, in the 70s. But she had a title and a staff and all that, and they were all women. Honestly, it was kind of, you could say it was another version of segregation or whatever you want to call that. And that she was only put in supervising women. It was sort of like the ink and paint department at Disney. But she was good at what she did, and she got noticed, and she strove, and she pushed herself, and she always taught us to be that. Because honestly, we were lazy when we were young, because we were just like, we didn't know what we wanted, and we just drew all the time and stuff. And yeah, that led to something, you could say, for sure. But it was directionless drawing. Honestly, even the way I approached drawing, I think, was directionless. I would sit down in front of a sketch pad and just start with an arm, and then add a head, and you're never going to get a good drawing out of that. We know that now, obviously. But back then, I was looking at it and going, well, I'm drawing. I just, and I'm kind of having fun. But I didn't have a goal. Like, I never set a goal when I first started sketching. I believe strongly you should have a goal.
You're a bit hard on yourself there. I mean, do you need a goal when you're 10, 11, 12? I mean...
No, I didn't discover that till later.
Yeah.
But I can tell you, I was frustrated. And I look back on it later in life, and drawing, another tangent here, but, I've done a few how to character design books, right? Art instruction books. One is called Character Mentor, and another one, the first one is called Creating Characters with Personality. And whenever you do a art instruction book, and I suggest it for everybody. And I kind of is another thing I kind of fell into, but I was like, oh, open door, I'm going to do it. What I found was I had to think about my process. Artists, we don't do that. We don't really think about our process. We don't analyze it. And you can tell some people do, and it's become more and more popular, I think, to have a process, to know and understand your process. And the Disneys of the world also want you to have a sort of process and things. So that's that. We've gotten into a production pipeline and thing that kind of where process is a big deal. When you're first starting out, it's not at all, obviously, as a kid. But also back in the day, I would say in the 70s and stuff, it was, nobody talked about it, right? So of like, oh, okay, I do this, this, and this. You know, you had to, that's not what art books were about generally. And so all I'm saying is when I did that book, Creating Characters with Personality, I had to analyze, wait a second, how do I go about designing a character? What are my steps, you know? And in that, I kind of discovered where that frustration came from when I was a kid too, was like, oh, you know what? I never was taught how to use a pencil. And that's a mind-blowing concept, right? We all think we were taught how to use a pencil, but we weren't taught, we were taught how to use it as a writing instrument, right? Think about it. When the first time somebody gave you a pencil, it was to do your ABCs probably, to write, right? Mm-hmm. And to learn how to write. Well, fast forward to your first art class, it might have been 6th grade or 7th, whatever, 5th grade. They didn't reintroduce you to the pencil oftentimes, unless you had a really good art teacher. A lot of times what they did was they just said, here's your pencil, draw this, or here's an idea or a concept, draw that. And we're still drawing lines, right? And they have to touch and they have to, right? But nobody said, oh, there's a difference between, and I feel strongly about this too. This is a new thing that I teach, because I also teach, so I have strong opinions, sorry. But I do believe there's a difference between drawing and sketching. And I think sketching is an art that we are losing in society in general, because the masters knew what it was. It was using your whole arm. It was using your wrist. It was sketching meant you were drawing lots of little lines.
And
little
light.
Shaggy.
Light.
Yeah. And but I'm even just talking about line. But you were drawing a shape instead of a drawing is if you said to any little kid, here's your pencil, draw a circle, what are they going to do? They're going to put it in a spot, hit the paper, and then trace around, not picking up their hand at all, and then touching the top again, right? It's going to be a line that goes into a circle, because that's what they know how to draw a circle, because we weren't taught to go, oh, no, I'm going to carve it. I'm going to think of it as a sphere. I'm going to sketch all around. I'm going to jump around. My hand's going to jump to the top, to the bottom, and sort of sculpt that circle. And now you get a bunch of little lines, right? Instead of just one perfect line that hopefully made a perfect circle.
Now, Mr. Bancroft, speaking of pencils and drawing, It is time to introduce your choice of short film.
Sorry, lots of tangents today. But yes, I'm happy to talk about this too.
And every tangent is fascinating. And I know our listeners will be looking forward to our repeat feature on this podcast, which is where you, our guest, get to choose a short film of your choice. Can you please tell us what your chosen film is?
I went deep on this one, and it was the very first one when you asked me that question earlier. It's the first one that popped in my head. So I'm kind of happy about that. It's called The Cat Came Back. It's an oldie. I think it's 88. I was trying to look it up real quick. I should have already done this. But it was in, we're going to say the early to mid 80s. Cat Came Back. It's by, hold on, I'm looking at that too, Cordell Barker. And this is a Canadian film. It says at the very beginning, it's funded by the Canadian Film Board. That was back when they were basically paying for animators to do shorts. It was just glorious. It really is where the whole boom in Canadian animation came from, is the government backed it early on and really pushed for that. But if you look at this thing, why I love this film is I saw it at Cal Arts when I was brand new. I didn't know anything about shorts, really. I didn't even know people were making animated shorts. I knew nothing about it. And this is one of the ones I was first introduced to in a class, I'm sure. What it's got in it, it's just, to me, still a perfect film of just funny gags, a really simple story. Literally, it's in the title, The Cat Came Back. about a cat that shows up on this guy's porch. He tries to get rid of it. It won't, and he has to keep trying to it keeps coming back. And it destroys his house when it comes back. And so he's motivated to keep getting rid of it. And he's trying to kill it eventually. So sorry, guys, if you love cats. But it's done in a very comical and I guess you could say safe way. He's the one that gets hurt most of the time. The timing on it is amazing. The animation. I'd never seen an animation style like this before. I was just so entrenched in Disney and what was in front of me, in the US especially. I'm seeing now an indie animator, but that does really fun, cartoony animation. The timing's really crisp. And then it's a simple style, but it's colorful in all the right ways. And they desaturate some of the background elements so the characters really stand out. And this was done on cells back in the day. So you can even still see some of the shadows of the cells laying on top of the background. There's nothing about this. The song, there's like a little song that goes behind it.
I love the song.
And the song is so addicting too at the same time. I just think this film would stand up now. I think I'll say this is a little commentary. I think where shorts have gone, especially the ones we see, because this one I think won the Academy Award too that year. What we've seen, the shorts go into the Academy Awards nowadays, they're a little bit, this would probably be considered too simple. I don't think it would get even nominated nowadays. I hate to say it. They like complex, either in style or storytelling or the actual idea and concept. This is a very simple concept, done very simply, but just done in a really fun, cartoony way. And you said this was one of your favorite shorts,
loved
too.
it. And watched it with my kids who grew up in Canada. And, we went and visited the NFB in Montreal. And, fantastic. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Gilly.
Thank you so much to Tom for reminding us of The Cat Came Back and for being a wonderful guest with many interesting things to say. That's all for now. If this is your first time listening to All Lit Up, please check out our previous episodes. Each has a wonderful guest sharing their stories and insights. And if you've already listened to them, then thank you so, so much. And please stay tuned for the next episode of All Lit Up.